Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. This week, joining us is Vlad Paiu, longtime developer of the OpenSIPS project, head of voiceover IP engineering at Sipstatus Communications. Thank you for joining us today, Vlad.
Hey Luca, nice to have you. Nice to meet you, I guess. Nice to have me. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. And could you please give us an introduction about yourself to start?
Yeah, sure. For whoever doesn't know me, I'm Vlad Paiu. I've been involved with the OpenSIPS project for like 12 years now. Straight off let's say, the college benches, I joined the OpenSIPS team, working directly with the founder, Bogdan Andreiancu, the founder of OpenSIPS. For like 6 years, I focused only on, let's say, OpenSIPS development, let's say, coding various features into OpenSIPS. You can imagine lots of stuff were missing 12 years ago, stuff like CDR, accounting, topology hiding, whatever. So some of those stuff I implemented. And then, let's say 6 years ago, I parted working strictly on the OpenSIPS project and went more into the generic, let's say, VoIP world. I took a role at Sipstatus Communications, which is a wholesale carrier routing various A to Z VoIP traffic. I work with them. Let's say I help them a lot in building their platform and growing it, scaling it, all of the regular stuff that, let's say, that carriers have to deal with when growing a company. And in the little, let's say, free time I have, I also offer consultancy to various other, let's say, OpenSIPS-based companies that need help in, I don't know, designing, developing, deploying OpenSIPS-based platforms.
That's great.
So that's about what I do.
So, OpenSIPS, I'm sure most of the people in the audience are very familiar with it, but since I never had the chance to interview someone from the project, could you give us a quick intro about what OpenSIPS is, maybe some project history, and how will it help someone doing voice over IP?
So the way I describe OpenSIPS is just a generic SIP server. OpenSIPS operates strictly at the SIP level, let's say, so it doesn't do any media related stuff or anything like that. And it's essentially, let's say, a Swiss Army knife for whenever you want to do some SIP manipulations. So that's why with OpenSIPS, there's no, let's say, one single use case. You can use it as a load balancer, as an SBC, as an actual routing engine. There's really, let's say, no limit in terms of what it can do strictly at the SIP level. It's just a matter of what you, as, let's say, the OpenSIP user, or let's say, user, I guess, is the good word of what you want it to do, and then you just go ahead and implement that in the OpenSIPS config, and it should be like a very fast and scalable solution that just does what you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard, let's say, to define it just because it has such broad use cases.
What will be the
But
main use cases, maybe? Like, what will you think is the top 2 or 3 use cases? Registrations, maybe?
just because the OpenSIPS on itself it is so, let's say, scalable, many people use it at the border, let's say, of their SIP infrastructure. So acting at the edge, sort of like an SBC type of deployment, where it can essentially take all of your traffic and then you decide what to do at the SIP level, where you need to send the specific call flows within your platform. Because maybe you have, I don't know, tens of asterisks or Freeswitches or whatever within processing your SIP media, but you would just have one single, let's say, OpenSIPS SBC or load balancer sending traffic back and forth. So I guess this one is definitely one of the big use cases. But at the same time, OpenSIPS can also be at the core of your, let's say, platform. Let's say, for the example, where you're strictly a VoIP carrier, so you don't do necessarily any interaction at the media level, you don't do voicemail IVRs, you can very well make your platform be OpenSIPS only based.
Okay, so that's well, about the project. How long has OpenSIPS existed, and does it have some special history?
Well, I guess I'm not the best guy to ask this because I joined
Mhm.
12 years ago at OpenSIPS, where it was already, let's say, ongoing as a project and so on. I guess everybody that has been around knows the OpenSIR history, where there, like way back, there was some guys maintaining or developing SIR, which was just like the initial, let's say, SIP proxy. And after that, OpenSIR got forked, and from there we had OpenSIPS as, let's say, as a child from that project.
How many
And
developers?
obviously,
Oh, sorry.
sorry, that was about it.
How
In terms
how
of
many
developers,
active developers does the project have right now?
let's say there are many guys contributing, let's say, minor stuff here and there, but as core developers, I think there's around 5 guys who really know their stuff and are actually committing core, let's say, code into the project. Obviously, there's Bogdan Yanku, there's Răzvan Craina, there's Liviu Kircu, there's Vlad Paiu, and all of these sound like strange names, but they're Romanian names. And myself, I used to be like a core, let's say, developer, but since I diverged from the project like 6 years ago, let's say I don't necessarily focus on integrating features into OpenSIPS, but rather I let the features come from the clients that I do consultancy or work for. Because let's say very often, let's say people come to me and say, hey, I want to do this with OpenSIPS, and then I look at it and say, okay, there's no support for this thing, so either we develop it and then commit it back to the, let's say, the OpenSIPS main Git branch, or there's no other way to do it. But many times there's also the opposite, or okay, we have all the tools available and there's no C code, let's say, development needed. We can just use whatever's there.
Nice.
So it's more like a, let's say, consultancy-driven development, at least for myself. I just let the features appear as people need them. I don't, let's say, force it.
Well, that's a very good path forward. I mean, there's an ongoing topic we've gone through on ClueCon Weekly, which is about how people should trying to support the open source projects, even the larger ones. Like there are some who have been around for so long and have so many users, which have a stable feature set. Case in point, various web servers, Apache, Nginx, they haven't changed very much, right, in the last few years, just because it's just they do whatever they need to do. Other projects have a bit of a problem with numbers on developers, quality of contributions, and especially many companies profiting from using them without giving back. Do you think OpenSIPS has the same problem? How does the community manage it? If you know, how many new people do you have helping, if there's any? What's going on?
Well, I guess, yeah, in the past or even now, I'd say some companies were just like taking open source software and, I don't know, building platforms and then selling them and putting like artificial limits. Okay, a channel costs you $5, but OpenSIP doesn't have by itself any channel limitation. So it was just like an artificial, let's say, limit imposed to make an easy buck. And even worse, I guess, is when you use an open source project and you just fork it and never commit stuff back to the main repository. But I think there's also, let's say, stuff are starting to not go this route, and people are figuring out that open source is a good place where actually new stuff are implemented, and it's like right now I think it's a good driver for innovation. Like a good example, I think 1 year ago or something, we hit like there was this issue with WebRTC and GWT authentication, because in WebRTC you usually have the guy, let's say, authenticating in a website, for example, and then at SIP level you need some other sort of credentials for the user to authenticate. So everybody was kind of having this double authentication issue, let's say. There was nothing to help with this. There was just a draft, IETF drafts like suggesting what you could do for this case. And then some guys wanted to do this because they really hated this double authentication issue. I helped them. We made an OpenSIPS module. We did some changes to the JSIP library so you can, let's say, perform this actual authentication and interaction between the client and OpenSIPS. We committed it into the main repo, and like, I don't know, 2 months later, it became an RFC. So I feel like definitely if people want to support a project and they say, okay, there is no support for this, then this is how you build a project. But you need also help from the community to say, okay, let's get this done, because otherwise it's hard for like simply the open source developers without any, let's say, interest to build features. So it's like maintaining a balance between people using it and then the developers helping the people use it. But also the developers have to make sure that the project is easy enough to use for guys to be able to start on their own. So let's say,
Yeah. So, do you think consulting is a good way to support an open source project? As you know, Freeswitch, we built SignalWire on Freeswitch, so we had a way to
mm-hmm.
support the project. And that's another way, like you build a company that sells a service based on your open source project, and then you use that to support Freeswitch. Since we started SignalWire, we've had more releases, more features. We have 2 people working on that full time, plus the core team, and it worked out. But you think also consulting is a good way?
I think, I guess, at least at the OpenSIPS level, it's the main, let's say, driver in pushing new features. So yeah, consultancy definitely works, at least for OpenSIPS in my point of view, because we can see that most of the features are or some of, let's say, are built based on the consultancy work. But obviously, you
Yeah.
cannot really leave just the innovation just at the consultancy level. You have to, if you support the project, you have to do some stuff, even if nobody is like asking for it. But just because you need to have them, let's say, maybe let's say your competition has it and you don't, you can't really expect somebody to come consulting for you and say, okay, build this for me. They will just go for the competition, for example. So some features you need to push pro bono because it's just what people want generically. And I think
Yeah.
in this, let's say, aspect, SIP is kind of different from HTTP because SIP is like is just always evolving,
Mm.
where opposed to HTTP, it's kind of, there's not that much, let's say, RFCs pushing stuff on top of HTTP as there are on top of SIP. At least that's my point of view.
Yeah, the difference between HTTP and SIP. Yeah, you're right. SIP is more dynamic. Like HTTP had the last few new. So what's quick? It's probably the latest innovation in
Yeah.
HTTP,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been a while already. I mean, it's not widely supported, but quick isn't exactly new. It doesn't move that fast. You're probably right. So, well, usual question. You're a developer, and I love asking this question. First of all, what's your favorite programming language?
Ooh, I guess being an OpenSIP developer, it's C. That should be the question, the answer, because like the first 2 3 years, I just use C to build new features. But today, I guess I would say Python, just because it's a lot way easier to prototype and just build an MVP about something. So
Yeah,
I guess C Python would be my favorites.
it's interesting how Python comes up so much. Well, C, of course, you need to know some C these days, C or C sharp or C++. You need some of it. But Python comes up
Mm.
very often in the scripting languages, more than Node, which I honestly expected I'd hear about more. I mean, we've had, I don't know, hundreds of interviews at this point, and few people have mentioned JavaScript as their favorite language. It's probably a necessity more than something you like. Like you have to do it, so you use it. But
Yeah, I guess that's not that pretty, and it has its flaws. Um, but I guess that maybe it's a biased opinion, just because maybe myself, I don't really work that much at the front end level or anything like that. And my work is, let's say never seen. It's always in the back end. So I guess that's why it's C and Python for me. But yeah, I agree. JavaScript is getting to the back end as well. It's just a newer, let's
new
say,
world.
wing of it. Yeah.
So
Maybe I'm old
another
school. I don't know.
another question that always comes that always I ask because it's fun. Okay, so I like Vlad's interview and I want to become like you. And I'm 18 years old and I want to start into the world of voice over IP. Where will you start if you could go back and start again?
That's a tough question. People like this
It
question
is.
usually. Well, I guess you need some sort of engineering background just because OpenSIPS is such a complex piece of software. It has like 20 years, I guess, of work put into it. So you need some sort of like low level understanding of what's a process, what's a thread, what's shared memory, what's whatever. So in order to be able to build stuff exactly into OpenSIPS, and then going to the VoIP world, well, you just gotta read RFCs and try to understand how SIP actually works, because in many aspects it's an old and kind of outdated protocol in some ways. Um, and even if you read it and read it and read it, I don't know, 10 years later, you come to like a real case, real world use case, and you're like, well, I don't know, is this right in SIP or is this wrong in SIP? I don't know. I have to go back and check. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say. Just start reading, start working, and then I don't know, try to do an MVP about something with OpenSIPs, and
Good. Yeah, it's a good
because I think
that.
that's a good part about open source in general. You can just prototype pretty much everything. You have all the tools available. Essentially, you have open source clients. You have open source SIP proxies like OpenSIPS, open source media relays. So these days it's much easier to like prototype something and test it out than it was, I don't know, 10 years ago. Definitely.
Yeah,
Because 10
the
years ago, all we had was like SNOM phones on our
yeah.
desks, and I don't know what to do with that. How I need to buy a phone in order to test something, and then their implementation was broken. But nowadays, it's way easier to do nice stuff with VoIP and SIP in general.
You're right. You can just download stuff and get going, and it's. I think I agree with you too. The most important thing is, well, you do need some kind of engineering background. That's to help. That's so much helpful for voice over IP in general. And then the big thing is just sitting down and spending time understanding SIP. That's unfortunately you can learn while you go, but if you don't read through, the first, you go through a few exchanges, even just simple stuff like what's the usual invite flow, what you usually authenticate in
Yeah,
invite flow. If you understand those, then I would add another thing: just learn to use Wireshark. That's
yeah,
literally that, that's literally how you survive in the voice over IP industry. It's TCP done,
yeah,
fish shark, whatever you like, but use one of
yeah,
them. It's
yeah.
just the main thing. So, which
Mhm.
other open source projects do you use in your everyday work, like at the service provider level or?
I guess the first example that comes to mind is RTProxy and RTPengine, because let's say one of the, I wouldn't say drawbacks, but one of the things that you cannot do with OpenSIPS is relay media. And if
Mhm.
all you need is just to relay media, you need something like RTPengine, RTProxy, which are also open source software. They're great softwares that are strictly designed for this, relaying the RTP from one side to the other. Can do also various stuff like transcoding, whatever. So those are, let's say, the big examples. Obviously, Freeswitch when the need arises. You ask generic open source softwares or VoIP related softwares?
Well, both. I mean, VoIP related. So you're using Freeswitch internally? Just curious.
Yeah, not only myself, but many other people, let's say, that are in the VoIP world, of course, use Freeswitch internally.
Yeah, the I'm
So
glad to
it's a
hear that.
great
I mean,
software, of course. And if if it makes you happier, I haven't used Asterisk for quite a while.
Yeah, I have. I mean, of course, I work with the Freeswitch team, and I've used Freeswitch for a long time, and I'm the one doing the Freeswitch training, so it's
Mm-hmm.
I know the project very well. But I think it's actually a great platform. Like
Yeah, yeah.
combining Freeswitch with OpenSIPS gives you almost everything you'd want from a voice over IP starting platform. There's not much you're missing at that point.
Yeah,
Maybe a couple
that's
of
true.
those heartbeats load balancing type things like proxy, the kind of stuff, to just to
Yeah.
avoid to keep your stuff away alive. So if you
Mm-hmm.
know, do you run everything on containers internally?
Uh, Usually I prefer bare metal, to be honest, when it comes to like high performance stuff. Over here
Hmm.
at Sipstatus, we usually run like lots and lots of traffic, and we never could get along with containers, to be
Oh.
honest. Many of our let's say other customers that I consult with are using containers, not a big issue, let's say. But I found like when you really need some heavy performance, either you scale to like tons of containers, but then it becomes like a maintaining mess,
Hmm.
or you use some bare metals, and yeah, you get into the uh, issue with scaling them and
What is the main
making sure.
problem you found with using containers? Just so, because it's not the first time this comes up, and there might be something here for the Docker and Kubernetes teams, right? To learn from.
Yeah, maybe I never like spent too much time trying to fix it when say when I could just say, okay, bare metals work. Look, containers don't work. Why don't they work? I don't
Oh
care.
yeah.
Let's use bare metal, because let's always when a new technology, or I guess it's not new, but we're old guys. Even Kubernetes is new. When a new stuff comes, if it doesn't like work out of the box, people are many times gonna reject it and say, okay, this doesn't work for me. What I found was like for really high loads, like when you want to have tens of thousands of calls on a single box, stuff just don't work as expected, and you have
Mhm.
some all sorts of delays, increased jitter at media level, retransmissions at SIP levels. So I found that at least the performance isn't really there versus
Hmm.
a bare metal, at least
So
for me.
there's overhead and especially the RTP level, right? I
Yeah,
always
because
feel like
RTP is.
UDP. I always feel like UDP is tricky when you're doing containers.
Yeah, and most of the times, let's say we're doing UDP traffic in this, let's say, heavy class 4 carrier wholesale type of environment, just because it's so much lighter. So yeah, UDP is tricky, but it's what we have, let's say. And I know there's other, let's say, stuff wanting to get us away from UDP, but I didn't find they
Mm.
have much success so far.
Honestly, UDP is just what works, in my opinion. Like it's the only way you can keep that performance, and performance is paramount in voice over repeat. If you have latency, the voices, packet loss, etc., it's never great. UDP is a known quantity at this point. You can do very good. We
Mm.
know it. Let's say it's not the greatest, but we know it very well, so we can always get it to work.
Yeah.
Right? That's pretty much it. The thing. So you run bare metal. Good, interesting. Yeah, again, I'm asking because I've heard this from multiple sources that, for example, we mostly run everything in containers, and we have a very good infrastructure for that. But it did take a while to work through. And sometimes you
Hmm.
still want, if you're running few servers, maybe it's actually easier to even not, well, bare metal is best, but even just the VM, the usual VPS providers, don't
Yeah, of
just
course.
running it directly on the virtual machines. It's still sometimes it feels bad. I don't really have numbers. Maybe what we should do one time is just try and test it. Like have a try running OpenSIPS on bare metal on a virtual machine and on Docker and see what the difference is, because there is something. It's certainly harder to configure for sure. Once it's done, it works, but it can be far harder for sure.
Yeah, I think OpenSIPS has by default like a Docker image where you can just take it and plug it into Docker if you want to like experiment with it. So for at least from that point of view, it should be easy to test, I guess.
Hmm.
Because obviously
Well,
there's some demand for this type of containerization, let's say, stuff.
People generally
Um,
use it a lot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the how does one specifically get started with OpenSIPs? What's the starting point? Is there a book? Should they just go to the website and start with the documentation?
Uh, well, I guess, yeah, of course, there's a book written by Flavio and Bogdan, one of the two of the core, let's say, OpenSIPS guys, which
Hmm.
take you through, let's say, everything from installing it to configuring to do this, that, and whatever. There's OpenSIPS, let's say, trainings organized, I don't know if once a year or twice a year, where you can just,
Hmm.
where, let's say, the OpenShips core developers take you, let's say, through essentially whatever the book takes you through, but you do it live with them in a VM or container. I don't know what they use. So they give like homework to the students. Okay, this do this. Okay, this isn't right, and so on. So they actually get some hands-on experience with OpenSIPS. And third, obviously, yeah, the documentation, the OpenSIPS blog. The OpenSIPS blog is actually a very good place to start if you have like some very targeted, let's say, questions. Like, okay, I want to do a cluster with OpenSIPS. How do I do it? There's a blog post for that. I want to do stir shaken with OpenSIPS. There's a blog post for that. So I really feel like the blog posts are, let's say, some sort of short tutorials about what OpenSIPs can do. And every time like a new feature, a new big feature comes into OpenSIPs, there's a blog post explaining how to, what this feature is about and how to use it and configure it into OpenSIPs to have it running. And
Nice.
this
Yeah.
blog post stuff is nice, and I think it wasn't here like 3 4 years ago, but
Oh yeah.
now we have it, so I think it's a
We've all
really great
gotten better,
addition.
right? we
Yeah, yeah.
it's just a matter, yeah, you just need to sit down and write stuff down. It's great to hear that there's training. I personally like to go, if I'm starting on a new platform, the best way for me is to do one of those, 2 or 4 or 8 hours, whatever sessions, and just
Hmm.
get started with that. It's usually the best way. So it's great to hear you have training going on. We did do OpenSIPS training at ClueCon a few years ago, so maybe we could bring
Yeah.
that back sometime. It's gonna
Well,
be
I guess everybody is struggling with bringing back live conferences.
oh yeah,
Actually,
for
there's
sure.
gonna be
Yeah.
like an OpenSIP summit this September in Athens. And it's gonna be the first time that we've seen each other in like 3 years in real life. So it's gonna be, I'm not sure if we're gonna recognize each other anymore or not.
Same thing goes for us.
Um,
The ClueCon is back in October from 17th to 20th in Chicago. If anybody wants to take a look at the website, it's glucon.com. And I do Freeswitch training on the 21st, and someone wants to join. It's going to be fun. But that said, it's the first time we've fully go back to in person. And yeah, there's many people from SignalWire and from the community I haven't seen in a while. I hope I'm not the only one that didn't lose weight, because then I will look bad.
in conferences, we just see our heads. We don't know what happens below.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
something very fun. Singaware as a company has been growing rapidly. So I haven't met all the people who work at the company in person. So every time we do a meetup, like we met in Florida a few weeks ago, and the thing that amazes me the most is the hate of people. Like, you can never figure out how tall someone is from video. So you've seen a person 10 hundreds of times in video, but then you think they're tall and they're short, or you think they're very short and they're taller than you. It's so weird because we don't see each other below
Yeah.
shoulder level. It's incredible.
Yeah, but it's
Uh,
good. We're finally starting to return to real life. But I think also the pandemic was good for voice over IP because lots of stuff
oh yeah, for sure.
happened in the meanwhile, and I really saw like a big push in people migrating to WebRTC, migrating to conferencing. Hey, I have this need. I need to build conferencing support into my platforms, and yeah, I really feel like it was strangely beneficial for the VoIP world. Uh, which is, I guess, a good tool to connect people when there was nothing to connect them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it certainly helped us getting a lot of stuff going on that was
Mm-hmm.
that will carry on. I mean, things are some companies are staying part remote. Most of them are actually. So it's what we
Mm-hmm.
built is going to stay. So you're from Europe. So aside from ClueCon, which is my favorite conference, my second favorite is FOSDEM. So which is also not have I think FOSDEM hasn't happened for 3 years in a row now.
Yeah, I was at the last FOSDEM, which was in person in Brussels, and then COVID hit, and I think it was all online since then. But maybe next February, FOSDEM will also be live because it was
Yeah.
also
So
a great
if it comes
conference.
back, I'll be there. So finally, we'll get to meet each other in person.
Hmm. Yeah, same here, because especially since it's really close to us.
Yeah,
I guess
we.
it's hard for people from the US to come to FOSDEM, but yeah, maybe some will come back.
Well, they get all of the other conferences. Like most of them are in the
Yeah,
US,
yeah,
so
right.
they get all of the others. So we get FOSDEM, which is fun.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of a kind. Like other conferences like ClueCon, OpenSIPS, Summit, they're just very focused and very technical.
Hmm.
FOSDEM is all over the place. Like it's 10,000 people in a city. People drink beer at 9 a.m. and then talks happen. And I once had the first slot in the second day, and nobody was there. Like it was on stage
Ah,
alone
so
at
sad.
9 because
I probably wasn't there either.
yeah, the night before people had too much beer, and then in the morning
Yeah.
nobody. You start seeing people around 11. So the first 3 or 4 slots aren't great, but other than
Hmm.
that, it's super fun. Cool.
Yeah,
So
let's
Vlad,
see.
thank you for joining us today. It was really a pleasure
Hmm.
meeting
It
someone
was
from the
great
OpenSys
being here.
projects,
Hmm.
and I think we had a lot of insight to give people. Cool.
Yeah.
So go check out OpenSIPS. Go check out the blog. Go learn about it. It's a great tool. Also check out SignalWire and ClueCon. And well, thank you, Vlad, for
That's
joining us
about it.
today.
Yeah, thanks, Luca. Nice meeting you.
And
Thank you, guys.
for everybody else, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye bye.